Hi there, welcome to Susan's 11-Minute Statistics. Today I'll be showing you how to do some basic data management in SPSS. Specifically, I'll show you how to recode your variables both into the same variable and into different variables. I'll be using SPSS 15 today, but this set of commands has remained relatively stable, so it should be good for other versions of SPSS, including through PASW. So I'll be doing all of this in 7 to 11 minutes. Let's go ahead and get started. And I will show you the data set that I created for this purpose. You can see here I have three variables: IDs, gender, which is coded, well, let's go into the variable view down here and you can see exactly how it's coded. You can see that women are coded as 1s and men are coded as 2s in this data set. And then I have an estimated BAC level, or blood alcohol level, and that variable is called BAL. And I'll be using that for a demonstration of the recode into same variables. So to start off, we'll be recoding the gender variable into a different variable. Specifically, I want to code it into a dummy coded variable for certain analyses involving the general linear model. So let's go ahead and go under Transform on your SPSS toolbar. And under that, you can see the two recode commands. We have recode into different variables that we'll be doing first. And when I select that, I need to specify the gender variable as my input variable. And I also need to specify here in this particular label my new output variable, which will be dummy coded gender. And you have to be sure to hit the change button here so it registers that you have the input and output variable. Then you go down here to old and new values, and you can specify that the men will be now recoded from 1 to the women will now be coded from 1 to 0, and we can add that. And then the men who were originally coded as 2s will now be coded as 1s. So that fits the dummy coding schema pretty well. Let's say at this point you had actually decided you wanted to effect code these variables. So you wanted women to be coded as -1. If you click on that piece of the syntax, you can ask it to remove it, and you can enter in a new coding schema. For example, effect coding. Or you could decide to change that, and we'll change that back to the dummy coding. If you change something, then you want to go ahead and be sure to hit the change button right there, and that will change that piece of syntax for you. You have some other options here about being able to recode variables that are system or user missing. So system missing being just an empty cell in SPSS, like these ones. Usually it's just a decimal point in there. You can recode that into a different value, or you can use user missing codes that you've already specified certain variable codes to be missing. You can recode those as well. You can also recode ranges of values, and you can even copy old values if you're only trying to change certain parts of the variable coding. So it's pretty flexible and pretty useful. Let's go ahead and hit continue here. We have what we need. And then I can paste this syntax, or I can just say OK and have it run. I like to paste it so I can see later what I've done. You can see here it's recoding the gender variable, 2s into 1s, 1s into 0s, to create the dummy coded gender variable. And we can run this by hitting this arrow up here, and should say in our output file now that we have recoded this variable. So let's go ahead and go into our data set and see how that looks. Can see here, looks pretty good. Now let's say if I wanted to move this variable to be a little bit closer to my original variable, I could put my cursor on the column title and click once, and then click again and hold down the mouse click and move it just using the mouse pad over to the left. And now they're right next to each other, so I can compare that pretty easily. My women, who before were coded as 1s, are now 0s, and my men, who were coded as 2s, are now coded as 1s. So it looks like that was pretty effective. The only thing that is a little bit different, and if I double click on this column title, I can get to the variable view for that variable. So I'm going to do that. I noticed that I have the value labels for the original variable here, but not for the new variable. So what I need to do is click over on the right side of the value tab, and then I can go ahead and label this as females being coded as 0, males being coded as 1. Then I click OK, And now you can see that value schema is in there, which is helpful if you analyze that variable, for example, using frequencies. You might want to be able to see what those labels are. So if I check out the frequencies, now you can see it's not in here as 0 and 1, but rather I have the labels in here, so male and female. So that's pretty nice way to be able to label and remember how you labeled your different categorical variables. Now, I'd also like to show you how to recode into the same variable, and we'll be using the estimated blood alcohol level for that. Now, the reason why I'm suggesting doing this is because, as you can see here, we have some negative numbers. And that happens because the mathematical formula will continue to subtract alcohol from your system for each hour that you have specified you've been drinking. Well, obviously, you really can't have a negative blood alcohol level. So what we need to do is recode these negative values as zeros, because in the human body, even though the mathematical formula makes that possible, the human body obviously doesn't have negative BACs. So we can assume all these negative BACs to be zeros. So what we want to do is we can see how that actually is in our data set. If we choose descriptives and I click over my blood alcohol level and say OK, you can see here that we have a minimum of negative 0.26, right? So that's our lowest BAC value that we think is pretty impossible. So we're just going to go up here to transform and into same variables. I don't really like to use this command much, just because if you recode into the same variable, sometimes if you use the same syntax, it can get dangerous because you can constantly recode it back and forth. But in this case, that probably won't happen since we're going to one-time recode negative values. So let's go ahead and do that. We just click that over into our numeric variable group here, and then we just need to click on old and new values to specify that we want the lowest through value 0. So anything negative, the lowest value we have all the way up through 0 will be coded as 0. And that's just going to target those particular values. On the other hand, we could also specify a range here. We could say we know that we have negative 2.6, so we could specify something like negative 0.3 to cover all of them through 0. That would be a possibility as well. Equals 0. So we could do it that way as well. But lowest through 0 pretty much covers everything. Then we don't even need to know what the bottom part of the range is. So that's a pretty safe way to go. We click continue, and we can paste that in our syntax. And then we highlight that piece of it and use the arrow to run it. And now we should see in our data set, looks like the negative values are gone. Let's go ahead and reanalyze that using descriptives again, just to double check our range. And we click OK. And it looks like before the minimum was negative 0.26, now we have a minimum of 0. So that's corrected our impossible BAL level issue. So thanks so much for joining me. That's a brief tutorial on how to use the Recode syntax in SPSS. Thanks for joining me. Bye-bye.